Got a squeaky chair.
Yeah, I know. What's up, guys? This is Clay Bowyer. The Clay Bowyer Show is what I've decided to call it. I believe this is episode number 4. I have retired police chief of Lafayette, owner of BlueHeart Consulting. I have Patrick Flannelly here. What's going on, Patrick?
Not a whole lot. How are you doing this morning, Clayton?
I'm doing pretty good. Just wanted to have you on. I feel like you would be a really interesting guest with your perspective as the retired police chief, and then I really want to hear more about your consulting business and kind of what all is going on with that. So, would you like to start with that and explain BlueHeart Consulting a little bit?
Well, yeah. There's not much to explain. It's actually pretty simple, right? So, just got done. I spent 27 years in law enforcement. All of those with the Lafayette Police Department. Prior to that, I did 4 years in the Air Force as a security police officer there. After that, came back here to West Lafayette, went to Purdue, got my bachelor's degree from Purdue, and started at LPD. But I bartended at Harry's Chocolate Shop when I was at school. I helped manage the pub for a while, so I've just done a little of this here and there throughout my career. And when you end your career in policing, there is a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience that you have, and generally you're pretty young. So I like to consider myself young. Just turned 55 a few months after retiring.
I would say.
So now it's like, well, what do you do with all this knowledge and experience? My passion is still in law enforcement. My love for the profession, my love for the people in the profession. So just one of the things that's always driven me are technology and wellness programs and things that we can do to improve the policing profession, the professionalism of policing. And really maybe my favorite mantra is hire police officers healthy and retire them healthy, which sounds simple, but it's not. It's a very, very difficult profession. It's very difficult it's tough on the body, it's tough on health, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. So the concept behind BlueHeart Consulting was taking those years of experience and then going out into the private sector and looking for companies that do work with law enforcement that are looking to improve the technology and the wellness industry within law enforcement, and then helping them.
Nice. I feel like obviously you have to be physically healthy to be a police officer, but I think the emotional and mental aspect of it may be almost more important. Do you feel like there's any policies that police officers here in Lafayette follow to try and keep their mental health up?
Well, I mean, we've made a significant investment in our police department to improve the mental and physical health of our officers. And we started this initiative under Chief Roush. Just dropped my phone.
No problem.
Yeah, that'll sound good, right? By requiring officers to have annual physicals, we brought in a police psychologist by the name of Kevin Gill Martin. He wrote a book called The Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement. We issued that book to every one of our officers. During my tenure, we then started to bring in one of our local celebrities, Dr. Will Miller, who's also a psychologist who was very familiar with, or we made him familiar with Dr. Gill Martin's work. And he began presenting to our families and our new officers from day one. What we wanted them to hear and understand was what the stressors of the job can do, some of the toll that it can take physically and emotionally on police officers. And then, quite frankly, the most important part is really, by understanding it, how do you positively impact it? How do you do things that are going to mitigate some of those damages so you don't ruin your health, so you don't damage relationships? And then we've built from there. So it's interesting. I think back in the 2014, 2015 timeframe, where in the post-Ferguson days in law enforcement. After what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, we started to see a big exodus from people in the profession. A lot of people were retiring early and leaving, and the Obama administration created an initiative called the 21st Century Policing Initiative, and they brought experts and police chiefs in from all over the country, and they had roundtable discussions, several sessions of them, one of which I was fortunate enough to participate in. And out of that initiative, there was a document that came out that provided 6 pillars for improving law enforcement, and one of those pillars, the 6th pillar, was identified as officer safety and wellness. And in that officer safety and wellness component, that's a pretty broad topic. Officer safety can involve a lot of different things, from just the tactics that an officer uses, to their physical fitness, to the training that they go through with firearms or different types of less lethal weapons they may carry, all the way to your mental and emotional well-being. And what we found is that in those early years after that document was published, that the focus really was on emotional wellness, which is good. It really needed to be there, but we really neglected not the physical fitness component, but the physical component. Like, are we taking care of our police officers? Are they healthy? Which they're not. So that's one of the things that really I've been really passionate about, and kind of went down that road.
Yeah. Is there any incentive to learn maybe some jujitsu or something as a police officer? I feel like, for instance, I had this interaction, not myself, thankfully, but I was at a McCutcheon sporting event, and there was somebody there that wasn't supposed to be there. They had a warrant or something, I don't know. But the officer that was handling it seemed to take a long time to get him out of the stadium and away from everybody. And I assume that's probably, there was a lot of kids around. The officer didn't want to make a big scene and tackle him to the ground or anything. But this went on for 5 or 10 minutes, and it ended up the officer had him on the ground, and there was a couple of dads that were helping the officer. And I just feel like with that, with the situation with George Floyd, if they knew how to I guess just take down a criminal or whatever you want to call them, and maybe put him in a choke or something like that, rather than the situation that happened at the school, or with George Floyd, where he was put his knee on his neck and ended up killing him. Is there a level of physical training like that is implemented now? If not, maybe could be?
Well, there always has been. That is a big component of an officer's training. We call it defensive tactics, physical tactics. You may hear in policing, the expression you might hear is ground fighting. But that is we could talk all day just on this subject alone. And interesting, even just the way that you presented it, because it sounds like you probably have had some exposure just by some of the terminology that you use, like a choke or rear naked choke. Some of those terms that the common citizen's probably not heard of before.
Right.
And there's one particular word in that really jumps out, and that's choke. And we just went through a significant legal battle, I should say, or discussions at the State House a couple of years ago in the post George Floyd era on the vernacular that was used was to ban chokeholds, and I think it was in response to what they saw in tactics, or I guess it's fair to say lack of tactics that were used by the officer. Derek Chauvin up in Minneapolis. So policing is a very, very complex task. And so if we start with just your example from the high school, the first thing that we want to do is de-escalate.
Yeah.
The goal for any police officer in any arrest is 100% compliance. That's what we're looking for. And I really wish this message could get out. If everyone forgets everything else about what we talk about today, this is the one thing that I think everybody should understand, that there is most of the negative interactions with police generally come from arrest situations. And then most of the controversy stems with how much force is used and when it's used and what are the outcomes of force.
Yeah.
And years ago, early in my tenure, we actually changed the name of our policy from use of force to response to resistance. That's the name of our policy. Why? Well, because police officers don't use force if there's no resistance.
Right.
So if everyone that we encountered was compliant and there was no resistance, there would be no use of force. There would be no response to that force. So therefore, there would be no response to resistance.
Right.
And so that sounds it sounds very simple.
Yeah.
But that's the truth. And so I try to tell people all the time, I'm like, go find me a video on YouTube of police using force in a case where there was not resistance or some significant form of controversy.
Yeah. So maybe that experience I had at the school was the officer may have been doing the right thing then, of just trying to de-escalate it and get him out away from the public as calmly as possible.
Sure. And again, there's an expression that we use inside the profession. It's called subject matter factors. So you're in every police response to resistance, you're evaluating the situation as it unfolds constantly. You know, we call it the OODA loop. Maybe you've heard of the OODA loop, right? Observe, orient, decide, act.
Okay.
And that is a continuous process. If you are engaged in some type of verbal de-escalation and it's effective, then you continue.
Yeah.
If there is no additional risk to anybody, then that's the path that we want to go on.
Yeah.
A goal of a police officer is to, if someone needs to be arrested and they have to be taken into custody for whatever reason, then the goal is to do it without anyone being injured.
Right.
And we have a priority of life that we follow. And in that priority of life, the number one is victims. Mm-hmm. That's our number one priority. Our number two priority is innocent bystanders. Anybody that might be around that might become engaged in this process, or be a subsequent victim of a response to resistance gone bad. Then three is the officer, four is the suspect. And it's important to think that suspect is on that list of priorities.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to injure anybody, and we don't want to injure ourselves. And so what I love about the concept of just be compliant is that if suspects in interactions with the police were just compliant, then the risk of them being injured would be non-existent. Mm-hmm. The risk to a police officer would be non-existent. And most importantly, the risk to any victims or innocent bystanders would be non-existent.
Right.
But that's not a choice that we get to make as a police officer. We have to respond to what we're presented to. Now, some might argue that it's the way that an officer interacts can have an impact on whether a verbal de-escalation escalates into a physical altercation with a police officer. And, in some cases that may be true. I also know that just from personal experiences that, sometimes, when people are intoxicated, when, that maybe they're mentally ill and, they're having a psychotic break, maybe they're on the use of some sort of drug that we just can't identify, and their behavior is irrational and unpredictable, that you can't always verbally de-escalate.
Right,
it doesn't always work. And there's going to be a point where an officer, in order to protect others first, themselves last, is that they're going to have to go hands-on.
Yeah.
And that's where things get ugly, right? That's where things go bad. And if you are a trained fighter, you can recognize very quickly who is very efficient and who is not. That's a difficult thing to train in like any fighter that does that for a living. That's all they do.
Right.
They train.
Right.
They train a lot, and I think it would be fantastic if we could get every police officer to the level of blue belt. We've heard Joe Rogan and Jocko talked about that extensively on their podcast, and both of them are, highly skilled, black belts in jiu-jitsu, and they've spent years and years honing their craft and training, and I think it's fantastic. I love the idea. I love the concept. However, it's something that has to be fit in with all of the other training requirements that you have, and
that's true.
So it's a big lift. It's a big ask. If you ask me what would be the ideal scenario is what Jocko comes from the special operations community. He was a Navy SEAL, and I would love for the United States to look at policing, or at least a part of policing, the same way that we look at the military, and the same way that we train and equip and prepare our military for combat. Now, when you say that, that brings up this whole discussion about the militarization of the police, and again, there's a whole nother topic, but the concept of defunding the police is so farcical that it's almost disturbing that we actually had legitimate conversations that was a good thing to do.
Definitely. Whenever something like the Ferguson or something like George Floyd happens, do you see some of the repercussions in Lafayette? Like, do people say like "F the police" more, and do they adopt that attitude a little bit more when stuff like that happens? Yeah,
we certainly see an uptick in things like that. It's an ebb and flow, right? I mean, in the age of social media and 24-hour news cycles, I mean, this is not, social media is the newer version of the 24-hour news cycle. What sells? Controversy sells. That's what gets people watching on their laptops. That's what gets them watching on TV. That's what gets them to open up the news app on their phone. People are going to see it, and people are going to feed it to you. And I think that's probably the more important part of the equation, is you're not just going to see it once either. You're going to see it nonstop. And when I say policing, we are connected now. It doesn't matter if you're a 6-man police department in Uvalde schools in Texas, or if you're the New York Police Department with 38,000 sworn officers, or anywhere in between. If something controversial happens, it's going to be on the news, and people are going to talk about it, and people are going to make broad and sweeping generalizations that we're all the same. And while our overarching mission might be the same, protect life and property, the way that we get there and the communities that we police in, they're different everywhere you go, and the societal norms are different, the expectations are different. And this is where, and this kind of just goes back to my point, where every police department has a different budget. They have different manpower. They have different local needs. And so, the policing industry, if you want to say, is greatly impacted by what your local needs are and what your resources are. So if you don't even have enough officers to run calls for service, when are you going to find enough officers to spend 2 hours in the gym training, or an hour, 3 to 4 hours a week in the gym training? Not just jiu-jitsu, but actually getting them to go and do a physical workout just for their own health and well-being. And that gets very difficult. So if you can't do it then while you're at work, then when do you do it?
Right.
When you're in your own time, which again is something that I personally wish that police officers would prioritize, and I think most do, but But that's taking away from your time with your family and your downtime from the job. So everything is a trade-off. Everything is an equation. And I go back to, if we trained like we were the special forces, right, then we would have a police department that would be out working. We would have a police department that's on a rest cycle, and we would have a police department that would be in a training cycle.
Yeah.
And
that would take a lot of people, though, and a lot of money, wouldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You would have to double, if not triple, your current budgets. And I would say probably we need to do that, if not even more. As a nation, we need to decide that that's the type of investment that we want, because to overtask and then undertrain and underprepare somebody for that task is,
especially in a job like that, man.
It's not fair, right?
Yeah.
And I think sadly we're starting to see some of these repercussions of that. This millennial generation, while they may be maligned by the older generation as maybe a little bit carefree, maybe they don't want to work as hard, I completely disagree. I think that they have been raised in an environment where they learn to appreciate what's valued and what's not. Mm-hmm. And that's what we see, right? If oh my gosh, this is a hard job, there's a lot of pressure, this is maybe not good for me. Maybe there's something else that I should do, or quite frankly, maybe I shouldn't even enter the profession in the first place.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, that I could see where that would be a thought for somebody, especially with how hated they are now, cops are now. I feel like back in the day, at least, they were like heroes. I mean, they were seen as heroes, and now it's just not. That's not the case, unfortunately.
Well, I'm not going to go that far, because again, that's sometimes that's the impression that we get if we make that judgment based on what we see on the news or what we see on social media.
Yeah.
The interactions that we have out in the public are far different.
Yeah.
Right. Our general interactions with people are very positive, particularly in Lafayette.
Yeah.
The greater Lafayette community, Tippecanoe County, has always been very supportive of our police, and so it makes it a desirable place to work, and it's certainly, it certainly meant a lot to me to have that support. Does it mean that we're perfect in policing? Nope. We have officers that sometimes have made mistakes under pressure. Mm-hmm. And sometimes mistakes are made, can be a result of being in the pressure cooker for a long time. So there's always a discussion that can evolve around that as well.
That's what I was going to ask you earlier. How much of the pressure compounds? Like, if you've gone like a week of just high stressful days, and then that seventh day, you have a situation that occurs, are you going to make a different decision because of like you said, the pressure cooker you've been in?
It's entirely possible, yes. And this is one of the things where I'm hoping we can get more research done. Technology has changed tremendously in the last 10 years. Our understanding of stress, how it impacts the body, how it impacts our physical health, how that directly relates to our mental and emotional health, and then ultimately for any professional, right? Not just policing, but policing is a very high stakes profession. Mm-hmm. Our decision making. At the end of that, what happens when people are tired and stressed, right? And you're a little. I don't think you have any children yet. You're pretty young. But I ask this question to a lot of my friends or people that I know, or when I have this discussion is, if you've ever had children, you understand this as well as anybody. As a matter of fact, that's why we like to hire older police officers when we can. And officers that have lived a little, maybe that have had a family, because nothing puts pressure on a relationship more than the stress of having a child. And a two-parent home is very challenging. Now put that into a single-parent home. What are the stresses on an individual? And now ask a single mom on a Thursday night, when she's worked 5 or 6 days in a row, maybe 1 or 2 jobs, if she's making her best decisions when she's tired and stressed, and certainly you're going to get the answer is probably, no. And but they're not going to realize that until they've had a chance to become rested and have a little bit of time to process what's happening. And that's
which is where those other shifts would really be beneficial to the police force.
It would be a game changer in law enforcement if we could make that type of investment. But that requires a significant investment from the citizens. And I don't like to go down slippery slopes, but I see we literally watched cities burn a couple of years ago. Over controversies surrounding policing, and I think as a country we reacted very emotionally, particularly at first. And then we got engaged and then the legislative process took over, right? And I think we got engaged in some heated battles about what was right, what was not right, what was best moving forward. And the disappointing thing to me was that, in a lot of these discussions, very few people were talking to the professionals inside of law enforcement about what was the right thing to do. How do we improve the profession moving forward? And it's not just in policing, right? We see this everywhere. Outsiders, engaged in decisions about what should happen inside of a classroom for teachers. Outsiders trying to decide how a hospital, should dictate what its nurses do in a COVID environment, or what. I mean, it's kind of crazy. And I'm not saying people shouldn't have a significant input, right? Because that's what this country is founded on. But we also have to trust at some point the people that are inside the profession that that want to do the right thing, that want to constantly improve. But eventually we got to the point where laws were being presented, policy decisions were being made. Many cities defunded the police. They've removed policing away from, money away from investing in the things that where we were suffering the most. And so it's like, if you've got a Major League Baseball player that's struggling at the plate, the last thing you do is get him less reps at the plate and cut his training time.
For sure. I think that's a huge problem that we have, and I hope we don't see that problem come out in the whole gun situation that we're facing with the shootings, where with just like policing, there's issues, just like with anything else. But how do we not slap some quick fix, simple sticker of a answer onto an extremely complex problem? And like with the gun situation, just like with defunding the police, how do we not rush into these almost emotional decisions and emotional policies, and that are going to eventually hurt us down the road?
Yeah, well, we're emotional creatures, right? I mean, that's who we are, and that's how we react. We respond emotionally, and that's one of the things it takes the longest to train into a young police officer is how to, as best you can, remove emotion from what you're doing, and try to be the neutral third-party observer, and try not to get sucked into the emotion. But it's a big ask, and it takes time. It takes time to train and prepare people to respond to very stressful environments, because police, we're not getting called to Aunt Betty's house to come have coffee and tea and have a conversation about how great things are on Main Street. We do get those every once in a while that kind of restores your hope, and like, hey, this, and it's a great reminder of why you put yourself through that grind. But most of the time, we're police officers, and every community is going to be a little bit different. Lafayette is a very active community. It's very busy. So our police officers are running call to call all the time. There are periods of time where they're less busy than others. But in those downtimes, that's typically when officers are trying to get caught up on paperwork and get, take care of the administrative side, the administrative functions of their job. So, but in between those times, there's not a lot of time to recover, and they're still engaged. And when they go to those calls for service, it's because something bad has happened. Somebody's in crisis. Very, very sadly, on my way here this morning, listening to the news, I heard, last night, 2 Los Angeles police officers were killed. They were shot and killed in the line of duty responding to a domestic violence incident. And, so my condolences to them. My hearts go out to the families, to the LAPD, because that's what we know. It doesn't matter if it's a big department like LAPD or if it's a small department like Uvalde, like we mentioned earlier. Those types of things can happen anywhere at any time, and so officers have to be prepared for that. Yeah. And this goes back to what we started on, the emotional well-being of officers, and one of the reasons why we bring Dr. Gil Martin in to speak, and why we issue everybody that book, and why we bring families in and prepare them, is because he was the doctor that really that coined the term hypervigilance and really brought it to the law enforcement profession. What does that mean? What is hypervigilance? And so this is where I'll give a quick explanation of it. Right now, you and I are sitting here, we're engaged in a conversation. We probably, depending on what your resting heart rate normally is, it's probably in the 60s. Since we're talking, if we were a little bit more active, it might be up in the 70s. But we're engaged in conversation, we're thinking, but we're not too physically active. I don't think either one of us are stressed right now. If we got into maybe some heated discussion, maybe our stress levels would go up and our heart rate would go up. But what that process is for a police officer, and the studies have shown this, the process of just putting on the uniform, when they're getting ready for work and putting on their uniform, their heart rate is going to elevate anywhere from 20 to 30 beats a minute. Wow. And that is the subconscious mind's response to preparing for danger.
Yeah, that's actually really crazy.
So the average heart rate is probably going to go from the 50s and 60s up into the 70s and 80s, and then when you respond to a call, not even a fight, not even something that just involves some maybe it's neighbors arguing over a property line, or get engaged in a juvenile complaint or something like that. An officer's heart rate may hit the 120s, 110, 120s, and then you imagine that all day long it's elevated, and that's the body's physiological response to prepare for how to respond to stress. It's baked into our DNA. So one of the things that we try to train police officers, right, is to feel that, to understand it, and it takes a long time. The training program generally is at a minimum a year long before we let officers out into a solo patrol environment. But even for the next few years, they're going to be closely monitored and supervised while they're gaining that experience, because and I tell people this, now imagine a time in your life where you felt like you were in danger, like something happened. Like maybe, let's go back to this fight at the high school. You see that. What was the response in your body as a witness to that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, your heart starts to race a little bit. You start to feel not uneasy, but like wondering what's going to happen from this situation.
Yeah, and that's the fight or flight response, right? That's your physiological response to stress, and without going into all the science of that, that's your body preparing. I either need to hit something really hard or I need to run really fast. And so as a result of that, all your blood starts getting pumped into your major muscle groups. You might actually start to experience some auditory and visual, occlusion, where the narrowing of your vision, sound exclusion, sorry. The sound starts to fade, and what you're focused in on one thing, like what's this threat and what do I do? And that's, again, that's a natural human response to stress and to fear. And if you haven't been prepared and trained for that, now you're going to make a decision about how to do that. So now let's say worst case scenario, that turns into an event where maybe it is someone in a crowd that has a weapon, and now the level of danger has just gone from 80 to 100, right? It's pegged, because if a person starts shooting in a crowd, we know for sure that when we talk about our priority of life, people are going to get injured. So we have to prevent that at all cost. And now the stress level goes up even higher. And so what is, part of, what one of the ramifications of that physiological response, if I need to hit something hard or run fast, I start to lose some of my manual dexterity, my ability to use my fingers, to feel my toes, those types of things. What's the one thing that you have to do and do accurately as a police officer if you're involved in a gunfight?
Shoot.
You have to shoot. So that requires you to use very fine, complex motor skills, aligning sights, getting your finger, in your hands in the proper position, and making these decisions in a rapidly changing and unfolding environment, and then doing it with precision.
Yeah. And when you talk about, you told this story really well. I was able to actually put myself in that situation of like the kind of the vision narrowing and the sounds. Like whenever you get in a high stress situation, like a car accident or something, was kind of where my mind went, where you're just like on edge like that. To be able to back yourself down and address the situation, that would be insanely difficult, I think.
Well, and I encourage people to go through the Citizens Academy that Lafayette Police Department puts on. It's a fantastic program. It was, as a chief, it was one of my favorite things, because we get to have these in-depth conversations. Because it's easy to watch something like that unfold. Like we'll talk about Uvalde for just a minute, because people say what they would have done. Mm-hmm. Oh, if I was there, I would have done this. I would have done this. And, that may be true. And while we're still gaining information about what happened there, what was true and what was accurate, certainly sounds like some things should have been done differently or could have been done differently. But that's easy to say from this chair.
Yeah, definitely.
When I'm not there and the bullets aren't flying past my head.
Yeah.
It's much harder to execute in the environment.
Yeah.
And so, I always tell people, that I try to put them in that position and try to get them to remember a moment where they had true fear, not just like ooh, I got scared for just a second, my heart fluttered, or someone jumped out at me or something like that. But like that moment where you do see someone swerve at you on the interstate or something where you have to take evasive action, or a fight breaks out right next to you. Depending on who you are and where you're from, those conditions could vary, right? A lot of veterans, understand this better than anybody, right? What it's like to experience life or death combat, and that, it's easy to say what you might do. It's another thing to actually be able to have to respond in that environment. And so, people are oftentimes shocked when they hear this statistic, but the FBI has done studies on the hit accuracy rates for police officers engaged in gunfights from various distances. But for the most part, we're looking at 30% accuracy rate from 7 yards or less in these in a gun battle with somebody with a handgun. And oh my gosh, a police officer that trains all the time with a firearm is still no better than a major league hitter, right? And I try to make that comparison from time to time. It's like, hey, you know what? If Mike Trout's batting 350, everyone thinks they're going to pay him millions of dollars. But if a police is 3 for 10, in a gunfight, well, that's maybe not so good. Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, right? But how do you combat that? How do you improve those numbers?
Right.
Well, you have to improve the person, and you have to improve the person's response to how they're going to manage that stress. So that takes a lot of time. And so with that in mind, what I think is, maybe one of the more important things to focus on is that primarily people are good, overwhelmingly good.
Definitely.
Despite what you see on the news every single day, overwhelmingly people are compliant. They're good people. They want to help out their neighbors. We may have different opinions. We may have different political parties. We may see things a lot of different ways, but overall, people are good. And in almost every case, people are compliant.
Yeah.
But, when they're not, that's when things get ugly.
Yeah.
And that's when things go bad. And so now what I fear is that people have an unrealistic expectation for how well and how much you can prepare a police officer to execute perfectly under extreme duress.
Yeah.
And then if an officer is not perfect, what are the ramifications for him
Yeah.
or her?
Right.
That's why we're seeing men and women leave the profession in numbers we've never seen before, and why we're not getting the men and women to come into the profession
Yeah.
that we need.
Yeah. I listened to one of Jocko's podcasts recently, and he was talking about how in the military they're very tactical, obviously, and that they will go into these missions, and I can't remember the phrase that he used, but whenever there's like a high stress, very chaotic situation, they'll shout something. The leader of the team will shout something, and that will basically just reset everybody's mind to do this one task, or everybody. It's like a play, basically.
Yep.
Whenever a football team runs a play, that's how he explained it. If you're in a no huddle situation and you just run like 42 ISO, they know it's going right up the middle. Like everybody knows what they're doing. Is there something that we could do like that with our school police officers more specifically? So when something like that does happen, it's like second instinct. They go straight into their playbook, basically.
Yes, and we do train that way. So there's a lot to break down in just in just that statement alone. And again, the one thing that special forces have that police departments generally don't have is the amount of time to train,
Yeah.
to go into a training cycle, and then enough time to recover. And even still, so you can go into a training environment, and I think one of the things that the Jocko talks about, I was fortunate enough just to see him in person not too long ago, but we also issue his book, Extreme Ownership. That's
Yes.
part of our leadership training program at LPD. But there's a ton of lessons to be learned in that. Not all the lessons from the military are going to translate to what we do in public safety and law enforcement, but a lot of them certainly do. And performing under pressure is maybe one of the more important aspects of that. But yeah, it takes time.
Yeah.
And even if you train it in a training environment, that doesn't guarantee that you're going to have success in the real world, right? When the crowd, again, we'll go back to baseball or to football. I can practice that play all day long, and I can know it in my sleep. But if it's 3-2 bottom of the ninth,
Right.
and it's up to me, and I'm at the plate, or I'm the quarterback, fill in your analogy here, right? Put yourself in those highest pressure situations. Then, how often do we see people have that success, right?
Right.
I just got done reading it was a book written by the coach that coached Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant, and he talked a lot about their mentality and their mindset. And one of the things that we see the highlight reels on YouTube and others of people making the game-winning shot, but we never see the highlight reels of people missing the game-winning shot. And policing is just the opposite.
Yeah.
So when there's a controversy in policing, all we see are the failures. We never see the successes. And there are so many more successes, ironically, in the policing world than there are failures. But people think it's flipped in their mind, is that it's all a failure, and that's just not true. But I think to Jocko's point, and really to what we really strive for in our training environment is to put as much pressure as we can, dose it appropriately. If you dose too much, if you put on too much pressure too soon, You'll drive people away from the profession. You push them to failure. If you don't dose them enough, meaning expose them to enough stress, then when they're out in that environment and they face these decisions, they may not respond the way that you want them to. They may not act in a way that's in their own best interest and the best interest of the people they're there to protect. So it's a balancing act, and it's different with every officer. Everyone's got their own learning points. So these training programs, that's why they're long and they're extensive. And the sad thing, like what we've heard about in the last few years is that policing in America is broken. It needs to be fixed. It needs to be reimagined, re-envisioned. And that is just ludicrous, again, because policing has never been better. It really hasn't. And the professionalism of police departments in America across the board is so much higher than it was 25 years ago when I started.
Yeah.
We've learned so much. There has been more that's been invested. And even with just what has been invested, there's so much more that we could do. But again, we're limited by time and resources like anything else. And so it's heartbreaking in a way to see people think that the profession is broken when it really is as good as it's ever been.
Yeah. And the push to defund the police, man, that is, especially after hearing that, like that, and kind of recognizing that a little bit, that if you think about the old, like real old school cops, I mean, you want to talk about police brutality. I think that's what that actually was back then. Police brutality was more of a thing. And I think now you can see, just like with everything else, we've evolved and grown into a very good process, a very good setup.
Right. Well, I'll say here's another Jocko quote for you, right? And maybe it was a Sinek, but you get what you tolerate. And society has evolved and changed a lot, and policing generally becomes a reflective of society at large. Why? Because that's where your police come from. We don't come from a different planet. We come from the homes that we're raised in.
Yeah.
And so, that's, again, your police department is going to be a reflection of your societal norms. And, society, despite what people think, has gotten a lot safer.
Yeah.
America has never been more safer. But if you ask the average person that, they think, nope, it's more dangerous. Nope, it's not. I mean, even with the uptick in violent crime across the country in the last couple of years, it's still safer than it's ever been.
Yeah.
Homicide rates in New York City are still a third of what they were in the late 80s and early 90s during the crack epidemic. And there's a lot to be proud of in our profession, and there's a lot that we know that we've done very, very well.
Yeah.
But that, with all that being said, it certainly doesn't mean that you don't seek constant improvement.
Yeah.
Continually learn, get better. Where are our deficiencies? Where do we need to improve? And I watch things, and and again, even as a police officer, even as a police chief, now retired police chief, it's hard not to get respond or have an emotional reaction when you see something. But generally, that first response isn't always correct, right? It's wrong. What do we lack? We lack information and context.
Yeah.
And so in those first few days, like with any school shooting incident, I learned very quickly to try to get the overview, like the quick basic facts about what we know, and then I just wouldn't follow it for a few days.
Yeah.
It's good to wait for a week or two, and then once you have your investigations that have been completed, where investigators actually have time to go through and get all of the information, all of the data, and then you go back and you look and see what decisions were made, when, and for what reason, under what circumstances. Then you begin to have an opportunity to put yourself in, if it's the case of a school shooting, if it's a response to resistance case, where you can fairly, impartially, and objectively evaluate what was done and why. Without, again, that snap judgment of wrong. But the problem in America today, and it's the world, right? It's not just America, is that we've got this beast to feed, and that's called social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, you name it, right?
And the mainstream media kind of adds to all of that.
Oh, absolutely. It's all a cycle, and it's hard if you're looking at that to not get emotional or respond emotionally or sometimes even irrationally to information that's just not accurate. We make these snap judgments. We get an idea in our head about what we think. We combine that with our own personal biases, and next thing you know, we're at a conclusion, and
it's nowhere near the truth.
It gets lost, and then we have these arguments that take place, these battles that take place, and whether it's left, right, I think we find that you've got probably 10% of the population on both sides that drives 80 to 90% of the discussion, and the objective, rational minds, tend to get drowned out. Because it's just not interesting, right? It doesn't grab your attention, and people don't want to take the time to understand. And that's another thing, right? Our attention spans are shortening. We know that. The data is clear on that. And that's a bad combination, right? A shortened attention span in a volatile, uncertain, complex environment and world. We need calmer heads. We need calmer minds. We need people that are going to think rationally and objectively through these problems. And again, police departments, I think, can also learn from these lessons and make better decisions in about what you say, when you say it, how you say it. And that's again, that's a part of the problem. When it comes to the public's perception of the police, is that oftentimes the public thinks that the police are trying to hide things or not being transparent because they're concerned about how they're going to appear, and it's just not true. Police. Our primary concern is the integrity of any investigation, whether it involves a police officer or your average citizen, right? Because every citizen deserves that. They deserve due process, and they deserve the right and best investigation they can get, and that oftentimes means that you don't share things publicly that can be later used against them, or used in an argument. It might taint a jury. There's some, again, that's a whole nother discussion. But I guess in a quick expression of that, it's sometimes it's the public perception that we're hiding things, and that's unfortunate because it's just not the case.
Yeah. Do you feel like we'll become a point in our civilization, kind of our culture, where we realize that we aren't meant to be as exposed to all this information as we are, and maybe we kind of step back and the rational, logical people say, well, that crazy piece of information that this mainstream media or that the social media is spewing is not valuing anything in my life. It's not bringing any value. Do you think we will be able to step back from this at all in the future?
So I do know that the science is very clear that it is driving mental illness, right? It's driving high levels of anxiety. It's changing it's literally changing our brains.
Yeah, definitely.
It is, but I don't want to go so far as to say that we're incapable of being able to absorb it, right, and eventually learn from it and process. But it's like anything else; it just takes time.
Yeah.
Right. We still have people that ride around on horseback. Why? Well, because in some places the horses are still the best way to get around, right?
Yeah.
So, I think it's important that we begin to recognize that there is a lot of damage that's occurring from too much information too soon. The way that we're being and I say manipulated because we know it to be true, right? That's the engineering design of how some of these technologies work. And I think we talked about that briefly, right? The man that invented the scroll feature, said he wished that he could uninvent it,
Right.
because of what it did to the human attention span and how negatively it's affecting people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, anyone can get on Twitter or Facebook or something and like, oh, I got 2 minutes, and I'll just see what's going on with family or
5
friends.
minutes later.
Yeah, next thing you know, it's 5 minutes later, it's 10 minutes later. You've lost track of what you were doing in the first place. You can't remember anything you looked at. And now, what have we accomplished,
Yeah, I
right?
think that's for your generation, it's like 10, 15 minutes because you have the attention span. For my generation and people younger than me, I think we get caught, like I'll just hop on for 2 minutes and it's hours that goes past. Luckily, I haven't been like that in a while. I used to be really bad on TikTok, but there's some people that I know that 3 hours of their day is spent just scrolling on the internet. And it's like, you walk away from that scrolling, run, and you don't have any idea what you took in. You don't have any idea the content that you absorbed in that run. And that's really scary, because that's like, if you want to talk about like brainwashing or programming or things like that, like when we literally get on there for hours and we don't understand what we comprehended, like I'm pretty sure our subconscious mind is probably still dissecting some of that stuff. So like you could really get swayed and manipulated, like you said, by just a piece of technology. It's kind of scary.
Well, so here's where I got really interested in this, and this was in the post-Ferguson days, and there is another podcast. It's the NPR podcast, but if you go back to the original, I think it was episode 4 and 5 or 5 and 6, they brought the woman that was tasked by Congress to investigate whether there was collusion or Russian, foreign interference in the 2016 election, and where it impacted the police was fascinating to me, because we have a hard enough time, fighting, public perception in a social media environment. But and again, briefly, I would encourage people to listen to the whole podcast, because it gives you, I think, a better context of maybe how people can be manipulated, particularly when it comes to voting or election or decision making. Is that if you did have somebody, let's say it's the Russians that are looking to protect their own interest as a nation, I don't even think might not be as nefarious as trying to get Donald Trump elected or get Hillary Clinton elected. In this case, it was really about what's in our own best interest, not even necessarily at a national level, but even at a local level.
Yeah.
And so they were, you hear the word bots all the time, right? What are bots and what do they do? Most people couldn't answer that. Those are just basically computer-generated accounts that can be used to create or artificially influence what people think is trending on the internet. And then you hear fake news it's we hear that ad nauseum, fake news. Well, what is fake news? What really happened and what the investigation uncovered was that there wasn't fake news that was being utilized. It would be a real news article, maybe something that, from an obscure publication or something that didn't generally get a lot of information. But let's just say if we want candidate A to win in Missouri, then and candidate A is in third place, candidate C has they have a 10-point lead on candidate B, and we're at candidate C, we're 2 points behind candidate B.
Yeah.
Then the process might not necessarily, let's not maybe make that candidate look bad. In order to elevate ourselves from third place to first place, what we might want to do is find a topic that is going to be divisive between A and B.
Yeah.
And then we find that article and we put that out on social media, and we drive this conversation about a piece of controversy that gets A and B fighting, and the next thing you know, candidate C is, he just got a 1 or 2 point bump in the polls over one little issue. Yeah. Now you amplify that, and so that's what they do. They put a real article out there. They try to get a couple of influencers to pick up on it, and they can be strategic by sending bots into that person's account to try to get them to see it and respond and react to it. And then once you get that going, you can see how quickly the dominoes start to fall. And so, it's so nefarious and so clever at the same time. Just the disinformation campaign. It does make you be concerned about what you're consuming. Yeah. But again, so I'll go back to, well, how are you being raised in the home? That's just the next generation. I think responsibility. I think social media is here to stay. Phones are here to stay. The internet is here to stay. These things they're never going away. So I think the more important thing is well, how do we educate and prepare the next generation to understand what this technology can do, how they're consuming information, and what are the ways that we can best dose them appropriately as they're learning and engaging, so they're not overwhelmed, they're not over-consuming, they're being dosed enough, not too little, because the answer is you just can't just take it all away, right? Yeah. Because someday they're going to leave the nest, and now they're in a world where they're not exposed to it, and that's there's the danger. So I think it's just we're a big country, 380 million people. It takes you can't reach everybody at once. I guess you can, but you're not going to reach them all in the same way.
Yeah. When you were talking about how organized it seems like that they have this process with bots and they've got this candidate and all that, it almost seems like it's an organized, like, I get called crazy, especially by my family when I say this, but it almost feels like it's an attack to me, like it's an attack on our lifestyle or something. I don't know what the threat is, I don't know who the enemy is, but it almost feels like we've got this American lifestyle that's so great. I mean, you can say whatever you want about America, but the lifestyle that we live is unarguably, I'd say, one of the best that any human civilization's ever lived in the history. So to try and change that as drastically as it is, and I feel like social media and the mainstream media are kind of the vehicles of that change and the vehicles of that vision that they want. It's just like, what are we giving up for what are we gaining? Like, we want to gain this inclusivity and this being nice and having empathy for everybody. And I agree with that, but then what are we giving up out of our lifestyle that maybe is not worth it, I guess? Like the freedoms, the ability to voice your opinion, the ability to do all these things, I feel like is getting kind of stripped in the name of empathy, and it's almost like counterintuitive almost.
Yeah, I mean, it's we probably would need a little bit more time than an hour to cover that, but I think we all have. Again, we'll come back to emotion, right? Because we're emotional beings, and we all have our beliefs about what's right and what's wrong. But we're also we are a melting pot, and we do have people from all walks of life that have all kinds of different experiences. And the value in America is that you get to share in all of those. And I think I think anyone that thinks that they're ever going to be able to control all of that is probably mistaken. I think maybe it's an overreaction to think that can all go away, but it's also something that must constantly be defended, right? And I think that's where that's where some of the controversy comes from, right? Because do you want to call them your average citizen? I think really truly appreciates their freedoms, and they are concerned about when they feel like they might be losing some. Again, we're an independent country, and this. I'll go back to law enforcement. I actually had one of my, I won't say his name, but when I was a very young officer, a wily old veteran, gave me some very sage advice once, and that he said, he's like, look, he's like, you're policing in America, where people were born, it's in our DNA to distrust authority, to fight authority, and that's how the country was born, from the fight to for freedom and not to be oppressed. So when you're the law, when you're the authority, you should expect that people are going to push back and they're going to challenge you, and that's not unhealthy.
Right.
That's actually healthy. So the advice and the point that he was making to me is that you got to understand what you're doing and why, and what the purpose behind this is. And that's, therein lies the weight of the badge, right? And the responsibilities that police officers have, is because you're there to protect the fundamental and constitutional rights of all people. Democrat or Republican or independent, liberal, progressive, conservative. That's what you're there for, right? And because of that, where the challenge really becomes is that people, that are looking to push their own agendas, use the system against you, and they manipulate the environment around you, knowing what your limitations are in your response. And so it's a calculated decision, and sometimes we adjust quickly. And we adjust well. I think as a country, even in terms of policing, sometimes it just takes longer. And sometimes it really takes us a while to recognize what the true danger is. And then again, one of my favorite expressions that I tell people all the time is that the wheels of justice turn. They're constantly turning, and it's a system that's turning. So you have to look at like a watch or a grandfather clock. You have to see the gears turning. One of those gears is the police department, your local police. But there's a lot of other gears in that watch. One of them is your prosecutor's office or your district attorney's office. One is your public defender office. Then you have the judges, and then you have the jails, and and then you have community stakeholders. You have all these people that are engaged in this process, and where I think we operate the best is again, the wheels of justice turn, but they turn at their own pace. And it's never. And I think where we know that we're probably doing it right is when nobody's happy. If people are looking for swift justice, we're probably moving too fast. If no justice comes, we're probably moving too slow. But when we find that sweet spot in there, that's the way the system has evolved over the last couple hundred years. There's always massive pressure on the system, and it's always being pressure checked. And at times I think we blow a valve, and things get off the rails for a bit. But I think we've always have found a way to course correct, and I do have faith that we'll continue to be able to course correct, and that we'll get the right people. We'll always get in the end the calmer minds, and I think we're seeing a course correction occur right now. While the 10%ers are in there duking it out, I think the rest of us are probably watching and realizing that maybe it's time that we start voicing our opinions a little bit more, that we re-engage when appropriate. That we do get not the extremists coming in to take these in these positions of public trust, like being police officers or being school board members or your state legislators or your government legislators. It has to be the people that have the greater good always at the forefront of their mind. America, is a great country. It is the best country, but there's no guarantee that we'll always be there, right? And we're just had this conversation last night with a friend over our discussion about Flag Day. So
Well, that's good, and we're going on an hour and 10 minutes, so we kind of wrap things up. I want to ask one last question. I feel like it's very easy for somebody in like who was in your position, or maybe the mayor, or somebody that's like a community invested in the community, to feel like they have a task that they can accomplish that'll help the greater good. I feel like a lot of regular people like myself, and I think about my parents, for instance, they're very busy raising kids, working, trying to provide a life for themselves, and I think sometimes it feels a bit overwhelming of like, well, what am I able to do? I've got to pay my bills, I've got to make sure my kids are straight, how am I going to help the community? Is there anything that an individual that is busy at work and that is maybe not paying attention to the mainstream media, is just trying to live their life, is there anything that they can do to really help the community out in a big way?
Well, yeah, and I think we get that here in Tippecanoe County. That's one of the great things about being here and living here. I think that's why we've seen the expansion that we've had, the growth, just, but with growth, comes challenges all the time, right? You're always adding new people into the mix, people that aren't used to our local norms, our community norms, and sometimes that can create friction, but that, a little friction is good, right?
Mm-hmm.
No friction, no fire, right?
Yeah,
no fire, no heat.
Right.
No heat, no survival, right? But those things are good. And I think, when you say the average person, I think we're all just average people.
Right.
And we all choose our paths. We have a role and a responsibility to play. And, my advice is just, is pursue your passion and do what is going to, number one, that's going to be good for you, that you enjoy as an individual, and then do what you need to do for your family, provide and support, but also recognize that, that is not an inconsequential task or role. I mean, raising kids is the most important thing that any of us will ever do, and raising the next generation, because that's who's coming in next, right? It's like any healthy organization, right? You have to have good people coming in, or it's just a matter of time until the organization starts to suffer. So, and you have to have the good people that stay. So from a community perspective, I think just being good stewards of what we've been given here in this community is probably the one thing that I would encourage people to do is, number one, be a good person. Mm-hmm. Be accountable to yourself first. And that goes, if you want to help the police, and do your part for the police, well then, be a good person yourself. Don't break the law.
Yeah, there you go.
And if you don't, and if you're challenged by the police, it's not I'm not saying you can't always challenge back, and push back, but you have to do it in the right ways.
Right.
And what I tell people is, there's never a right time to do the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And arguing with a police officer over whether you're going to go to jail or not, once the police officer's already decided that you're going to jail, it's too late.
Yeah.
And your time is not there on the sidewalk. Your time there is in front of a judge, and that's why the system, has these checks and balances built in, right?
Yeah.
Police officers don't decide guilt.
Right.
We make decisions based on probable cause, and no fight, no resistance,
Yeah.
and then no one gets harmed, and but that doesn't mean that you can't challenge the police and do it in a respectful way where we all get to be better from it. And that's, I've appreciated that. I've had people that have challenged me over the course of my career, and I've learned a lot from them. But I also know that, we can do better, I think, as a society sometimes, in just ensuring that we teach our kids the right things.
Yeah.
And that's respect each other. I think if we just did that, respect everybody, treat everybody else, the golden rule,
Right.
the way that you would want to be treated, then I think that would go a long way in lowering the temperature,
Mm-hmm.
and getting people to think a little bit more calmly and rationally and objectively about what, what you can't always do what's always just good for you, right?
Right,
Sometimes
right.
you've got to make decisions that
Benefit the community.
that's going to benefit everybody.
Yeah. Very good. Well, I think that was a good way to close it out. I think the moral of the story is just be nice and turn your news off.
No, you need the news. There's a lot of good people out there, trying to bring us the good news. And you know, you have to get the bat. I'm not saying bury your head in the sand. What
Yeah.
I'm saying is that, you know, dose yourself appropriately.
Be objective.
Yeah,
So,
and learn to tell the difference, right?
Yeah.
And that again, as a parent and as an adult, you know, take a civics class.
Yeah.
You know, take a journalism class, right? Learn the difference between what's good information and what's not. And as much as we like to question the police, every once in a while we need to question ourselves too, question our own thoughts and our beliefs, and why do I feel this way? Why do I
Yeah.
think this way? And what would it be like to be in the
Yeah.
shoes of this other person?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I think that story you told, or this the way you kind of explained the stressful situations, for me at least, that really put me in that situation almost. So I can see that.
Well, yeah, I can promise you this. You know, we've got a great police department, and you know and I can promise you that they're working hard every day to do as much as they can to keep our community safe, and they care about what they're doing. You know, that's the hardest part. People have asked me, you know, what's it like, you know, being retired now, and that's kind of the hard part is you feel like, you know, you've done your part, and now you're passing the baton, and you've got another generation that's coming up, and you want to be able to take that 27 years of knowledge and just, you know, drop it in that young officer's
Yeah.
noggin and say, here, take this and build on it.
Yeah.
You know, hopefully, and I think we've been able to improve as we've gone, and you know,
Yeah.
hopefully 5 or 10 years from now, LPD is better than it is today, and our community is better, and that's, you know, that I guess that's all we can all do, right? It's just
Right. Be better.
try to be a little bit better.
Yeah. Very good. Well, let's end it on that. Thank you
Right
guys
on.
for listening.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Gang, gang.